This is Global Tel Link. You have a prepaid call from an inmate at the Centinela State Prison, Centinela, California. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. To accept this call, say or dial 5 now. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
So we were at. I just asked you like if you had like any friends in school that
Other
you had.
friends.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I wouldn't say I had any real friends because, like I said, I had moved around so many times that you know what I mean. I was always basically in new schools, getting in trouble in the next school, getting in trouble in the next school, and I had basically alienated myself in each one of the schools because again, I was so, you know what I mean. I was failing academically, so I'd be embarrassed because of that. So I'd get angry and end up acting impulsive, or you know, of course, when I'd go to different schools, my mom would figure, okay, well, if I could put them in a good school, then maybe, you know, things would be better. But the reality of it is we're broke. We don't have, you know, you go to a good school with people that got good clothes, good stuff like that. So, of course, you know, people are going to find stuff. You know, kids can be pretty cruel, you know. I know that, you know, because I ultimately ended up becoming one of those cruel kids, you know. And so I guess you would say that no, I didn't really have any friends, more or less probably till middle school. You know what I mean? Like it was more or less, I believe that's kind of what drove me to the gang because the reality was like I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. You know what I mean? I was a light skinned Mexican, and my mom kept putting me in like white people schools and stuff like that. And it was like we didn't obviously we didn't have, you know what I mean? Like we didn't have much, so I didn't have like good clothes to, you know, to fit in right there. So I didn't fit in the Mexican school because I was too light, and I didn't fit in the white school because I was, you know, because I was Mexican. You know, so it's just kind of like. You know, and again, like I said, the reality was that I didn't know how to communicate, you know what I mean? And then I carried that with me from early on. You know, I didn't know how to, you know, express myself. I didn't know how to speak to other kids, you know, and I was real aggressive, you know what I mean? And like I said, my feelings got hurt and I got angry and I would start to act some kind of way because I didn't know how to convey to other kids that, hey, I just wanted to be friends. I just wanted to be cool. You know, like I didn't understand what they were talking about when they would talk about, you know, my shoes or my clothes or things like that, you know, as far. You know, that's, you know, I was happy to have what I had, you know, but I didn't, you know, of course, you know, kids, they have a tendency of pointing things out, you know, so to answer your question, no, I don't believe that I had any friends early on. You know, I may have had one friend here, one friend there, but nothing that I would say that no lasting standing relationships, you know.
Once you got to into middle school and junior high, is that when you started getting in trouble or your first time getting arrested or anything of that nature?
Well, the first time I ever got arrested, I was in the fifth grade, and I had a teacher had slammed a book on my desk, and I end up picking up the chair and throwing the chair at her, you know, and because I was that kid that she'd sit right in front of the desk because if not I'd be disruptive in the back, or so she sat me right there, and of course I'd still be disruptive because I didn't have the mental capacity to do the work at the time, so I would just be, you know, talking and acting up, and so I basically stressed her out to the point where she slammed a book on my desk, and I ended up picking up my chair and throwing it at her, so they ended up calling the sheriffs, and so because I was barely going to be 10 years old, I was 10 years old at the time, that they called the sheriff, but the sheriff came and was like, man, we don't want to take him to juvenile hall, you know, for something like this, you know, so they ended up calling social services and getting social services back involved, you know. And so that was the first time I had ever had my own personal run-in with law enforcement. You know, my actual juvenile hall stays didn't actually start until 1993. And so a few years later, when I actually started getting locked up. You know, because that time they ended up releasing me. They ended up letting me out, and I they ended up letting me out on what you call it, like JWP or something, where you got to go and clean cars, or like clean the cop cars and clean in juvenile and stuff like that the first time. And so since social services got involved, I didn't end up staying on probation or nothing. So they ended up I didn't actually have to stay in juvenile hall.
After that, I'm assuming you had more arrests after that first encounter with the police.
Oh yeah. In 1993, I ended up getting arrested for shooting at some dudes. It was shooting a firearm in a residential area was the charge because they was selling dope. I was selling dope originally in the alley right there in Indio, and the dude that I was selling dope for, he ended up sending me to another town right next to us right there to go basically help him run some dope right there, and some fools try to run off with the clavo. And so, because he always used to tell me when he would leave me on the graveyard right there in Valencia, he would tell me like, look, if anybody doesn't pay, he'd give me the strap. And when I was like 12, he'd be like, give me the strap and be like, look, man, if these fools don't pay, you got to bust at them. So, all right, cool. And so, by about 4 or 5 months after I started doing that for him in the alley in Indio,
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
go to La Quinta and set up shop over there. They got a bunch of white boys over there that like to buy stuff, and don't trip, So I ended up going over there with a little 25, and not long after I got there, these fools ended up trying to run off with some clavos. So I ended up actually shooting at them through like two houses and like a dirt lot running around the back, and I guess one of the neighbors ended up calling the cops. So when they came, they actually got me with the gun. And so the other guys never got caught, so technically it wasn't shooting at somebody, it was just shooting in a residential area, and possession of a firearm.
What happened between the ages between 10 and 12? Because first, you had an incident with the teacher, and now at age 12 you're shooting. How did
Excuse me. That's a big leap. So when I went to sixth grade, right? When I went to sixth grade, I started school at La Quinta Middle School, and I had a couple cousins there that were already gangbangers from my barrio, and I used to be from the Jackson Terrace apartments right here in Indio, and so when we lost our house in North Indio, we moved with my aunt over there to JT, and it was obvious because my primos were a little bit older; they were already all gang members. So my mom, in an effort to try to keep me from falling into that little thing, we ended up moving. That's how I ended up at the other school. So. But the thing was, at the other school, like about a few months after we moved, my cousins actually started going to school over there. So my mom's like, look, you're going to go to school right here, and Andres is already here, Mikey's already here. They go to school there, so don't trip. And I'm starting sixth grade, you know what I mean? So when I got to the school, it was like it wasn't even an option. I got there, and my primos were right there like, look, man, this is where we kick back at. This is where them fools kick back at. We were actually going to school in another barrio's school, but there was a bunch of fools there from Indio because everybody was getting kicked out of school in Indio, so they were all going to school in La Quinta. And so when I got there, my cousin was like, look, you know what I mean? Like, this is what it is. This is where we kick back. So essentially, he's like basically telling you, like, you're with us now. This is what it is, and he was already from my barrio at the time. So I was like, all right, cool, and it was a trip because all these years I was trying to find somewhere to fit in, trying to find some, friends, people to be cool with, and here I'm starting in the sixth grade, and I didn't even have to look. They came to me. My cousins were right there at the front of the school, when we got off the bus, like, look, this is what it is, this is where all the homies kids, and they took me straight over to a group of like 25 kids, 7th and 8th graders, and they're like, look, this is the homie Wooty Whoop, this is the homie Wooty Whoop, and on my side of town, there's 4 cliques. Now nobody gets along. Now they're all different barrios. Everybody's at war with each other. But back in them days, everybody got along. Like, everybody's clicked up. It was just the south side of Indio, and then you had different cliques in the south side of Indio. But so all these dudes are from different cliques right there in Indio. But we all backed each other up and got along. So when my primo introduced me to everybody, he's like, look, man, check this out. Like, this is what it is. This is my primo right here. This and that. So from the very first day, I remember how I felt that day, like, damn, like this, like, these are my homies right here, like, these are my friends, and like, looking back now, in the reflections that I've had to do, to begin my transformation of where I am today, I had to look back and think about what I was thinking and what I was feeling during all these times, these milestones in my life, and I remember that was one of the days that like, I remember, like, all the homies shaking my hand and like, all right, so you're the homies primo with this and that, like. And basically, like, I remember feeling like I belonged, and thinking in my head, like, all right, like, there's nothing I won't do to keep these friends, And ultimately, for the first few days, my primo basically, like, walked me around the school. We walk around the school and basically, like, look, fool, like, you're going to back up the homies, like, we're going to back up the battery, like, what's up, eventually you're going to get jumped in, just don't let nobody disrespect. And he showed me where the enemies were, and basically, like I said, I wanted to belong to somebody. I wanted to be down. I wanted to be cool and accepted so bad that there was nothing I wouldn't do. You know what I mean? Like, I was willing to fight anybody. I was willing to do anything at that point in time, you know, and of course that came real fast, because as soon as the enemies see that you're with, you know, like, okay, that's where you're at. Like, anytime they catch you by yourself at the school, they're going to try to jump you, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, so sixth grade is when I started gangbanging, like probably about 3 months after I got to the school, I finally got jumped in, you know?
When that shooting happened, was it the gentleman you were hanging out with, or you were keeping point with? Was he part of the neighborhood too?
Yeah, it was actually me, my homegirl Loca, and my homeboy Strawberry. We actually went to this pad to go. There was these fools from that barrio right there, from the La Quinta boys, and my homeboy's like, oh, I know these fools, like, they're all right, don't even trip, you know, like, I'm you know. And so, because it's their barrio, you know what I mean, like, I gave him a little bit of dope, I gave him a little bit of scante, and he's like, well, look, he goes,
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
since you're in my barrio, I'm just gonna keep this, you know. And I was like, what, you know, and he's like, yeah, and he just like turned, him and the other dude turned around to walk away, you know. And I stalled for a minute. You know, I was a kid, you know, I barely, you know, gonna be 13 years old. I don't even think I was 13 yet, because it was in early '93, I think. So I wasn't even 13 yet. So I was just kind of like, you know, I stalled, you know, at first for a second, and then I remembered what Pitorras had told me, like, hey man, if anybody ever tries to burn you, you just blast these fools, you know. And so, mind you, I've been for the last, you know, last year and a half, I've been getting this propaganda put in my head from my primos and everybody, like, hey fool, we don't rank out, we don't go out, we don't let nobody disrespect the barrio. So I'm being conditioned already that, like, hey man, to let somebody get over on you, you know, at all, you better handle your business at all costs. So of course, when this dude walked away with the clavo, my first thought was like, oh man, what do I do, you know? And it took me a few seconds. He got towards the back of the house, and then I realized, like, you know what, man, I gotta handle my business. So I pulled the gun out, and I started shooting at them. They were probably like a good, you know, 40 feet, 45 feet away between the houses by the dirt lot in the back, and they took off running, you know. And so, in my mind, I remember, you know, like I said, with the first time Pitorras gave me the gun, I remember the power that I felt I had by having that gun in my hand, you know. Like, all my life, I felt like I was out of control. I felt weak. I felt small. You know, I felt like nobody seen me. And I remember when Pitorras gave me that gun the first time in the alley, I remember how it made me feel. I remember how having that clavo, selling drugs, and being able to give people drugs for this dude, you know, how it made me feel, you know. And I felt like, all right, cool, you know. And so when I remember pulling the trigger that day, like the thought that I had in my mind, like, damn, that was crazy, you know what I mean? Like, I kind of low-key felt exhilarating, to be honest with you, you know, like, with the normal fear that I felt in the beginning, like, man, these dudes are taking off my stuff. After I had pulled the trigger, I was sitting there thinking, like, man, you know what I mean? Like it was nothing, you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't scared. I was so unafraid that I actually stayed there at the house thinking nothing of it till the cops showed up. You know what I mean? Like, not even thinking that the cops are coming. In my mind, I was telling the homies, like, yeah, anybody tries to jack me, I'm smoking, you know?
And when they give you this gun, what kind of training that came with, you know, you taking possession of this gun?
Like I said, when Pitorras gave me the first gun, the 32, there was no training. It was a revolver. He just like, look, check this out. This is the hammer. You cock the hammer back, and you know what I mean. You just pull the trigger, you know. And we had shot it in the desert right there. We had, you know what I mean, like he. But as far as like training, there was no formal training. It was basically like, hey, these are the bullets. You put them in here. Here, you pull the hammer back and you point and you shoot, you know. And I had only shot it maybe one time in the desert, 2 times in the desert before. And
You have 60 seconds remaining.
But the one that I actually shot at them dudes, it was actually a 25. I actually had traded I had a Super Nintendo that my mom had put a Super Nintendo on layaway for me, and I actually took my Super Nintendo and I traded it for that gun, that 25 that I actually got caught with for shooting at them guys with.